Okay. So hi, yeah, thank you for joining me tonight and thank you for your time. This is my presentation on bird photography as from the perspective of a high school student. So first, well, who am I? I'm a junior at Lick Wilmerding High School in San Francisco, and I've been birding for just over 6 years and been photographing for about equal time. Now, most people have like a spark bird per se, but I rather have like some spark characteristics. Like there's three values, beauty, diversity, and behavior that have kind of captivated me from the start. Ever since I like saw these birds have all of their places and niches in society, and then to see their beautiful plumages and how many there were, I was like instantly hooked on birding. So, as I've grown as a birder for the past 6 years, I've kind of developed a philosophy or an ethos about how I photograph. I know that there's like a lot of split in the birding and photography communities about like ethics and stuff, and I was just going to cover a little bit about that before I go and show the photos. So the first thing is the subject that we capture. It is very nice being a bird photographer because we don't really have to add beauty to the scenes. Mother Nature has taken care of that for us over thousands of years. All our job is to really capture that beauty and show it to the average person. However, birds, unlike many subjects, are living animals, which means they need space, care, and respect, especially for vulnerable species such as owls and breeding birds. It's important to keep in mind, like what you're actually photographing. It's not an inanimate object. They have really complicated lives and oftentimes are left best undisturbed. And the other thing is artificial setups can sometimes ruin that like mystique and of nature. And so I tend to avoid those in my photography. Now, on to the more like subject versus object idea. Like the subject are the birds and the object is the camera you're shooting with. And so I've gone over the subject of what we're going, but also the object. As a high school student, photography was initially kind of difficult to get started because I'm sure, as many of you guys know, photography is not cheap. Oftentimes, cameras and gear can go into the thousands of dollars, and so especially as a high schooler without any big boy money, it's hard to get expensive gear. But you don't need super expensive gear to start photography. Just a baseline camera and a lot of persistence can create really beautiful images with anything you have. And those images can really convey the beauty. As a bird watcher, I'm very used to the beauty of birds, and I've appreciated it to a great extent. But photographer's job is to kind of take that beauty that you've discovered and share it with everybody else. And so I do this by constantly experimenting with my photography and trying new things. So quick little thing about me, my story is I started out with a point and shoot about 6 or 7 years ago. But now my current setup is a Nikon D500 with a 200 500 millimeter f5.6 lens. And many people ask about the post processing, and I use Lightroom Classic. Like all teenagers, I go through phases, and I'm sure to all the adults here, that's no surprise. But I would like to show some of those phases through the photography that I've taken. Now, I started off in a place where many people do with headshot photography, and headshots are really nice because they can capture a wide range of emotions. And the first one being this sort of intimacy, this sort of eye contact. And I think that's best shown through raptors. So I'm going to start with a couple of those. This is a great horned owl. And I was like kind of walking through the forest when I kind of noticed this thing staring at me. And so I turned around and it was this beautiful owl. And the beauty of a close up in this image is kind of getting that eye contact. Oftentimes when people see a bird, it's kind of far away and it's hard to like picture their eyes. But in a photograph, using that long range of lens, you can get really up close and personal. This same kind of intimacy you can see in this other photo, which is of another raptor, the red-tailed hawk, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, where this one is less of kind of this subtle grace, but more of this kind of like checking me out and sizing me up. And it's got that really curious look in its eye and its face. Um, I also captured that with this American pipit. This was down in Monterey, and I was kind of on the beach photographing some other species when this curious little bird kind of popped up. Was probably wondering what I was doing there with my really big camera. But anyway, it was kind of peered into my lens hood and took a close look at me where I captured this shot. And also, this is seen like in other birds as well, such as this domestic Muscovy duck, which I photographed in Compton, where it was kind of in this park, and a lot of people like disregard domestics, but they are just as equally curious as all of the native species. This bird is another one that shows curiosity. And if you notice the lower bill or the mandible has a slight orangish tinge along with the gape patch as well. And that indicates that this bird is a juvenile. So this bird has probably only been around for a couple of months and is probably just venturing out of the nest. So I took this photo in Golden Gate Park in this oak forest where it was where it definitely nested and somewhere up in those trees. And so this was kind of its first experience out of the nest, and I bet it was checking me out and just as equally curious as all the other species. This bird is a hermit warbler, and this is a West Coast specialty. People don't often see this species because they're so high in the trees, and they're very scarce on the West Coast, especially where I live in San Francisco. But this young bird was kind of like taking a second to check me out, and I thought it was a really incredible experience because it allowed you to get up close and personal with this species and see the details, such as the individual feathers in the wings, and the really bright orange face. And you can see like the settings here. That was taken at only 360 millimeters, so it was really only like 10 or so feet away. Another time we can get a really nice close-up view of the feathers is in this green heron. Usually, herons and stuff can be really confiding in the reeds, but this heron decided to kind of come out, probably because it was in Florida, but it was a very showy, very exuberant little heron right here. And in this photo, you can see its glowing eyes and its kind of chevron patterning on the wing. Next is a bird I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Being from California, this is often like the first and probably only bird that's taught in schools, our state bird. And the up close format serves really well for this species because you can see the individual scalloping pattern on its neck, but also that characteristic little dongly thing on top of its head that I'm not quite sure has a name, but is really funny and is really emblematic of this species. And also there's this Wilson's warbler, which is another juvenile bird, which is kind of checking out its surroundings. And this close-up allows you to kind of see its scruffy feathers, probably just fledging the nest not too long ago. And finally, it can show some gruesomeness too. There's a lot of cuteness in birds, but then there's also this side of birds where it's like the kind of bird eats bird world. And this was a raven shot at Abbott's Lagoon up in Point Reyes. And from a far distance, my brother and I were like, oh, you must be eating a mouse or something. However, upon closer inspection, it's actually eating another bird. And this ravens can be really, well, ravenous. And as it was eating this bird, we can really see how gruesome it can be. This Western sandpiper was in migration and appears to be a juvenile based on the feathers. So this bird might have been injured or tired after its long first journey and met an unfortunate end to this raven. Moving on from portraits, I kind of I tried to look at individual aspects of what I want to focus on. And one of the other things that has kind of grown alongside my passion for birds is passion for other stuff, such as like plants and the ecosystem as a whole. And since birds are just one part of that ecosystem, it's really important to capture their involvement with the rest of it. So, for example, this bird is a tawny-capped euphonia, which does not live in the United States. It lives in tropical regions of the Americas. And I really love this photo because it shows a female bird, which often are overlooked by bird photographers as a whole because they may not be as showy. But this photo is a perfect example of how they can be. There's beautiful golden tones on its head and more olive tones and gray towards the flanks, which create a really interesting blend with the forest. And just as its plumage blends with the forest, it is also carrying some of that forest back to probably create a nest. This is another bird. This is the sheer opposite, a bright male common yellowthroat, also at Abbott's Lagoon, probably carrying some moth larva back to its nest hidden down in the reeds. Next is this rufous hummingbird. This hummingbird is pretty amazing. They migrate all the way from Mexico to Alaska every spring and then again in the fall. And this bird was taking just a quick break at Bernal Hill, really close to where I live, which is one of the best places to see it in the Bay Area in migration. And it came down for a second just to feed on this Pride Madera plant and then leave. And I was really struck by the beautiful color between the throat and the flower. Finally, is this EEV. EEVs are a Hawaiian honey creeper, which is closely related to finches, but were isolated on the island of Hawaii for a very long time. And this photo shows the EEV with its characteristic red decurved bill feeding on the mame plant, which is also endemic to Hawaii and is actually a legume. And just to show this dynamic, this whole environment, this whole ecosystem that just occurs in this one island in the photo is, I think, really beneficial when you're trying to capture both the bird and the environment that it's in. Another aspect of close-ups that I tried to focus on were colored backgrounds. Instead of just focusing on the birds, I wanted to create a composition and a feel for the image as a whole. So one example is this mourning dove. This is a very common bird that I'm sure many of you are familiar with and maybe even nostalgic about. This bird was hanging out in my neighborhood, so on an early morning walk, I noticed this bird sitting on a branch in the rain. And I really think that the warm colors contrasted with like the coldness of the rain and some of the colors on the sides created this really interesting feel and vibe to the overall image. Another one where I was pretty struck by the overall composition was this Cabanis's wren. This is a wren of kind of the more dense forest in Central America. And this bird is usually like really down in the bushes, but this one decided to be a little bit more bold and kind of come out of this dark rainforest. So I think the cooler colors contrasting with like its open view also provides something pretty interesting to look at. Next is this Patagonian Sierra finch. Now, Sierra finches are birds of South America. This one was in Chile. And it this is a bird where it's just recently speciated from its cousin species, the gray-hooded Sierra finch. And the main difference between the two is not the plumage, which is what many people think, but it's actually the habitat. The gray-hooded Sierra finch is of open, kind of drier areas where you get more straw-colored tones, and the Patagonian Sierra finch is of these great, like temperate rainforest in the southern hemisphere. And you can see that in this photo as it's kind of high up in this dapple canopy, showing off the beautiful greens with the yellows. Next is this house finch. Now, house finches may be some of the most common species in the Bay Area. This particular photo was taken on Mount Davidson, and it really shows one of my favorite aspects about San Francisco, which is the fog, Carl. So sometimes the fog can be pretty dense. I'm sure if many of you know that Mount Davidson is only visible in the most sunny of days. So this bright red male house finch was a really cool note to pop out of this really dense fog. Next, another specific topic I chose, and kind of my next phase was kind of this black and white edgy phase. I'm sure a lot of teenagers go through that one. But black and white photography is super interesting because it can show a lot of the texture along with the pattern, which is something that can be lost in color photography. So here is a photo of a common raven. This photo was taken near the Sutro Bats, and often I feel like ravens are passed off as just blackbirds, just one color, not super interesting here. But taking a closer look, especially in black and white on this high key photo, is really interesting. You can see the different bristles on its bill, along with the feathers on its head, and even this like darker, more beard-like thing, which gives it a lot of depth. Um, yeah, this photo, yeah, just provides a lot of contrast to what is normally seen as a not very contrasting bird. Second is this really old gray blue heron. You can see its really scraggly feathers with even feathers sloughing off of it, and its spiky crest, and even kind of a molting wing. This like antique bird was kind of given by this antique color scheme, but also you can see like a lot of the variation and again what a lot of people just pass off as blue. Um, Next is this great-tailed grackle. This photo was taken at Lake Merced in San Francisco. And it's a photo where a lot of the great-tailed grackles in the area line up in the early morning and sing their song. So I happened to be right at the right place at the right time to capture some of that song as its breath catching the morning sun. And the fact that they're all in a line, which shows pattern, but then also this like really subtle coloration on the actual mist and stuff coming from its bill provides like a really another shows off like a great example of what a black and white image can represent. Next is another example of patterning, and this is in a flock of mixed sandpipers. As you can see on the right or left, it's composed of Dunlin, Sanderling, Lee sandpiper, and Western sandpiper. These flocks often form during migration, and they stick together and kind of create these really wavy patterns to distract predators such as the nearby peregrine falcons, prairie falcons, and other maybe apparently ravens too. And yeah, this photo was shot at yeah one thousandth of a second to kind of freeze the wings in flight. But there is more that you can do with wings. Wings are a pretty uniquely avian thing. I know bats have them too, but birds are especially known for their wings. And wings not only provide this kind of like this like freeing poetic sense, but also just provide a challenge. It's really hard to photograph birds in flight because they fly incredibly fast, and it's the combination of challenge with focusing as well as creating an interesting composition is something that really intrigued me. For example, this is a black-faced ibis, another Chilean bird. And this one was kind of foraging low on some grasses off to the side of the road, but then picked up in the higher wind and flew really close to me. And just seeing such a majestic bird and such a heavy bird take flight was pretty amazing. On the opposite side of the spectrum was this tiny and very aerodynamic blue and white swallow. This bird, they fly very fast and very high, but one amazing thing that you can see through swallows is this pattern on the wings. And this is another thing that photographing birds in flight can provide. A lot of birds have really interesting patterns or hidden coloration on the inside of the wings that can really only be explored through looking at them in flight. This red-tailed hawk is no exception. This is a juvenile red-tailed hawk, so it doesn't have its distinctive red tail yet. But what it does have is, as a juvenile is a lot of this barring on the wings, which is really apparent in flight. Along with this willet, a lot of people pass off willet as kind of that junk shorebird, the one that's just gray and common. But freezing a willet at just the right time as it's taking off can provide this crazy, like zebra, almost butterfly-like pattern on its wings. And also, wings can be used as a defense mechanism. This photo is of two Western gulls at Pillar Point Harbor, and this photo was taken after a long day of pelagics. Anyone who's taken one knows how stressful they can be and how tiring. And it was quite the surprise to roll back into the harbor and see these two birds just going at each other with their wings cupped around each other and then biting each other's bills and heads until about 10, 12 minutes later, there was nothing really left in the water except for a few feathers and some blood, and the birds had just gone their separate ways. I don't think either of them won, but the wings are definitely shown off in this. They're also shown off in another menacing bird, the red-tailed hawk. This is like a really interesting dark morph, which are not super common. I believe they make up about like 20% or 5 to 20% of the population. And this bird is showing its um, very ferocious beak and wings as it glides over the area. And even the wings extend to pelagic species. This is a black storm petrel, which is a bird we very rarely get to see because they often live on the open ocean. But seeing their incredibly long wings making really interesting reflections off the water provided like more of an artistic view on what wings can be. And leading into this artistic view, this is kind of like where I was going with my next phase, which is these non-standard aspect ratios. Now, a lot of people stick to what they get off their camera, which I'm not exactly sure the dimensions, but is like a pretty standard rectangle. However, I think you can get a lot of really interesting effects by using non-standard aspect ratios and kind of experimenting with what post-processing can look like. For example, this turkey vulture was taken on Mount Diablo, and I used the aspect ratio of really long to mirror this dead, I'm pretty sure it's like a mountain mahogany or something of the sorts, to imitate this dead tree with this turkey vulture. And of course, incorporating elements of that black and white as well to create this image. Another one is this another pelagic species, the long-tailed Jaeger. This one does not have a long tail yet, but it shows this really the strictly pelagic nature of this species where it's placed up really high in this corner and it shows a lot of the ocean in the horizon line. And it creates this like really small bird and a large image, which photographers call SIF, SIF photos, like small in frame. And that is just one way to convey, to show in the post-processing how a bird's behavior can be shown in the editing. Another one is this white-breasted nuthatch. This bird is one that sticks really close to trees. As you can see here, they pretty much climb vertically up and down these tree trunks and just getting as close as possible to that bird and trying to frame the rest of the tree as sort of a landscape in this photo was a really interesting way to get down to the bird's perspective. Another one is this American pipit. Same bird you saw from earlier, but has a totally different feel. After it was done with me, it kind of continued out onto the seaweed to go look for its next snack, which are these seaweed flies that are in abundance everywhere. It can also be non-standard aspect ratios can also be used to create really a lot of tightness in images. This photo was taken in the desert along Bob's Gap Road, And it's this northern mockingbird with this kind of really sharp beak, along with these really sharp yucca leaves as well. And it can even create like a flow of energy. This was a family of striped woodpeckers that was found in Chile. And you can see the juvenile kind of begging for some food from the adult and kind of pushing it to one side of the frame, and using a lot of space on the right side of this image can kind of show how the energy is going in that direction. Now, as a student and as a young photographer, I'm definitely still experimenting with new styles. And one of those that was kind of inspired by Ray Hennessy's presentation last time was the use of backlighting. A lot of my early photography I shot with this kind of cloudy, this gray background, this overcast, like really neutral light. But you can like, I've learned to kind of lean into when the light is not ideal, such as this austral parakeet. Most parakeets are really loud and really showy, and they you will know that they're there, except for this species, which is of the temperate rainforest in Chile. This species sticks high in the trees and are only sometimes seen. So I tried to capture that by photographing just its silhouette. Another species that I wanted to try with this black backlighting was a California gull. This bird is found along inland and the coast, but it is interesting to see it framed against the classic California sunset to create just a little light highlight around the head and back. And finally, this photo of ruby crowned kinglet. It may be a little hard to tell it's a ruby crowned kinglet at first, but this bird flew into this tree in Death Valley National Park in California and posed against the really harsh desert sun. And so initially I was like, oh, I need to get in front of this bird to get good lighting. But then I accidentally took this photo and I was really surprised and kind of intrigued by all of the strange patterns and like strange diffractions that it makes around the head. And that was a really aha moment for me in terms of photographing birds, not in the best lighting, but sometimes for just the artistic purposes. So as I continue to photograph birds, I'm always looking into new forms of photography. Like I mentioned, Ray's presentation last week was super cool, and I edited this flamingo photo in Chile to kind of show another SIF photo. They are found in habitats that can be easily that are like really close to both the mountains and the valleys. And I thought it was cool to show off that really unique like duality of habitats with this photo. And as some advice from someone who's been doing this for a couple of years is I encourage other young birders to pursue their to pursue photography as a way to express their love for nature, to kind of take what they've internalized, what they've seen as beautiful, and maybe convince other people that it's beautiful too. So that's about it for my presentation. Um, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Great. I'll hand it off to Valerie.
Okay, so hi, I'm Valerie. Let me just get my screen up quick. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so this is my presentation. I have kind of a similar perspective to Rajan's. I'm also a young birder and photographer. I'm also a high schooler. But I hope I can really show my unique perspective here. So my background, I'm a senior at St. Francis High School in Mountain View, California. I discovered bird photography and also birding during the pandemic. And like Rajan, I really fell in love with, well, not only nature, but seeing each unique bird species kind of in their own habitat. Um, I think they really have all of their own, quirks. And it's really exciting seeing each new species. And I also co-founded the Santa Clara Valley Young Birders Club. So as you might be able to tell, I have more of a South Bay perspective. Um, a lot of my favorite locations are in like San Jose, Palo Alto, um, and yeah. The gear that I use is a Nikon D7000 with a 55 to 300 millimeter lens. And that's actually a kit lens. My main setup right now is actually the D500 plus 200 500. But I just wanted to put that other setup because it's actually a setup that I use quite often when I'm traveling. And I still feel like I can get really good shots, even though quality might be not as good as my really long telephoto. Um, but I use it a lot, and it's one that I really like for its variety. So just an introduction into my birding philosophy. Very first thing I have on here is looking outside the bird, and that's because I think a lot of beginner photographers, when they first started to take photos, they really want to get like the closest shot, the most detail. But a lot of the time that requires, a really long lens that might not be financially accessible to a lot of people. So I take a more not gear focused approach. So that might mean including more environment, really thinking about the background, um, anything that helps you make a unique shot without that gear. And that also means that I'm okay with technical imperfection. As you'll see, some of my shots, maybe not completely in focus, maybe they got a little bit of grain, but I think in some circumstances, that's acceptable if you feel like you're getting a really unique shot. And lastly, I really want to highlight the beauty of local species because I know in the Bay Area we have such a diverse range of habitats. We have mountain, scrub, beach, pretty much anything you want. So it's really nice seeing all the different environments you can get in just this one area. So my first category here is light and color. This was one of my first focuses. Um, I was really fascinated with people I saw online that had really unique maybe backlighting or really colorful backgrounds, and I try to kind of adapt that into my own style. So this first image here I have is a grebe, and I was photographing along the lake, and I really tried to emphasize this kind of misty, almost hazy wave of light, um, because I really liked how it hit the bird from the right side. The bird's going into the frame, creates a really nice transition zone, and it really emphasizes the space in the photo. The light takes up a lot of the space, and so that kind of makes for a more interesting photo. My second photo here is an oriental magpie robin in Hong Kong. And this is kind of unconventional because it takes advantage of artificial light. So this was taken quite late, definitely in blue hour, quite a bit past sunset. But I was able to take advantage of these park lights that were in the background to create both a color contrast and kind of a light contrast. And I really want to emphasize that here, the bird is really not the star of the show. It's actually, those background lights, those leading lines, everything leading to the bird, which I find really interesting. This is a robin, and it was taken a lot closer to home than Hong Kong. It was actually taken about 2 minutes away from where I live in Mountain View. Um, but this also has some similar elements. So I also had the element of artificial light. We have kind of a golden shaft of natural light from sunset, but also you have some park lights, and that's what creates that really unique bokeh. And in editing, I really tried to emphasize color contrast, which is why we have that bright green grass with the orange bird and light, and I like how that kind of matches up. Um, Another thing in this shot is that I tried to get eye level because robins in trees are often very high up, but getting eye level to the grass is a unique perspective and it shows off all the detail in the bird a lot better than, just a high up shot with branches. This next shot here, I was actually walking along the beach and I saw these Kieran's gulls. And what I really wanted to emphasize is kind of like the magicalness of the sea foam. Um, so the gull is walking on the foam, but you can't really tell that much because the light's kind of hitting in a certain way to really make it kind of like ethereal. Um, so it creates another element of interest, this like unconventional background, while also creating, some action and then also nice contrast between the subject and the background. Next, we have this coot, and this really shows off some unusual light. I actually thought the day was over and I started walking home, but suddenly I saw this like beautiful pink pinkish light hitting the water. And this light is actually not edited that much. This is pretty much what it was like. Um, yeah, but I took the shot. There ended up only being coots on the water, which is a very common bird. But I still think it's really great to highlight common and local species because it shows, what's actually there. And it also shows a more unique perspective of a common bird, which you don't usually see. Next, similar to the gull shot, we have this whimbrel that was hanging around on the sea foam. And I really just like kind of the same things as the other picture, how ethereal it looks. And we also got a little bit more of a gradient between the bottom of the image and the top of the image. Lastly, we have this gosling. So I actually took this around midday. It was not even close to ideal conditions. The light was pretty harsh, but I saw this gosling on a hill, which is what creates that really nice blurred background. And an element that I really like here is the blurred foreground with the background and the sharp bird, and it creates a really nice color contrast. Our next category is geometry, and I've tried to emphasize more unique geometries, kind of like Rajan. So we do have a lot of, rule of thirds, but we also have some things that break the rule of thirds and some things that are not like, centered or looking into the photo, which sometimes can actually create a more unique shot than just your usual, rules. So our first word here is a common grackle. And what I learned from this image is that sometimes it's good to wait. So I actually first saw this grackle like on the pole. It was just sitting on the pole. And obviously I tried to take some shots of that, but that kind of created a more common shot, not very special. Where I think this shot is really special is in the specific geometry I was able to get with the pole in the bottom right corner and then the grackle in the top left. That really nice silhouette, it kind of frames the silhouette and creates a really nice focus. And you can really see that great wing detail. And I think that's a much better shot than would have been if I just taken the shot of the bird on the pole. Next, here we have an osprey. So this was along Jordan Lake, and I knew there was some ospreys hunting, so I knew this was a shot I could get, but it was getting pretty dark, and I didn't have my really good lens, so I knew that getting like a really sharp, good shot would be a challenge. So I decided to go more small in frame. Um, I think what that does here is it really emphasizes the space, birds fly in the sky is big. Um, that really emphasizes that aspect. But you can still see some detail on the osprey. You can see it's caught like two fish and it's kind of flying into the sunset. Next, we have this black neck stilt. So in this image, I really tried to use geometry to highlight the unique features of the bird. So there were a bunch of stilts feeding on some shellfish on the shore at sunset. Um, at first, I wanted to capture kind of the light contrast because we have the sun on the lake, which almost creates kind of like a fiery light. But what I really like about this image is, stilts are very elegant birds. They're black and white coloring, and also they're very long-legged. Their body's very long. So through this image, I think we're really able to highlight that elegance through the curve from the bird's beak to its tail. And that's not something you see too often with shots of this bird. Lastly, we have this eastern phoebe. And this was also not taken in ideal conditions. So it was around midday. I think I took advantage of maybe a passing cloud, but I was able to get really close to the fence line. And that creates some really interesting leading lines because you got the fence itself in the lower right going up to the bird, and also the fence post in the upper right going to the bird. And that coupled with the kind of transitioning depth of field, we got really out of focus in the right, leading straight to the bird, creates a really interesting shot. So our next category is close-up, and this is, I guess, your more common category. It's the one that most people try to get, but I tried to emphasize something unique, which with each close-up that takes advantage to the proximity to the bird, which is, obviously very close. So this first image is a red-winged blackbird. I was along the coast. I saw this flock, and it was a cloudy day. So I saw a good color transition. So through my editing, I really tried to highlight how the colors work together. So I desaturated the greens to work well with the browns and emphasize that really nice detail on the bird, which is a female. So I know we always think of the males as like the really colorful, showy ones, but females can still have really good detail and really interesting patterns as well. Now this is a dark-eyed junco, and obviously these are very common birds almost everywhere, in parks, in backyards. So I really wanted to get a unique perspective. Because juncos often forage on the ground, but you don't often see shots of juncos that are not from above. So this shot was taken like almost under the junco. I'm kind of looking up at its belly, and that kind of emphasizes a different part of the bird that you usually see, and also emphasizes the bird against a more blurred background. Um, so I think this is a really unique close up, and it really brings your focus, to its face and its eyes rather than the ground. Next, we have this eared grebe. This was along Shoreline Lake, and it got quite close. And through the close-up, we're able to see the really piercing red eye, and also the kind of red tones in the background, which complement that nicely. Um, so I think this is interesting because of kind of its unique body position and also that focus really on the eye. Next, we have this owl. So this was a really unique encounter for me because it was actually taken in my backyard. So you kind of see my neighbor's house in the background. I was sitting right at this desk and I looked to my right and I saw the owl land. And I was like shocked because I'd never seen a Western screech owl before. So I grabbed my camera and I started taking pictures. And this was just a lucky encounter overall because, the owl got really close. The lighting was good. It wasn't obstructed by any branches or anything, and it was looking at me. And I didn't even get out of my room. I took all these shots from my window. Um, so I just really loved that story and how we were able to get those, really piercing yellowish green eyes. Now this one is a Western bluebird, also a very common bird, but I think I was able to get a unique perspective on it because of the framing in this picture. So this is very close up, but it also has some really interesting shapes. The bird is very fluffed up, so it's very round. It's a very cute bird. And that kind of matches the cavity it was in and also the framing altogether. So we got the very textured tree bark leading to detailed bird, but also some space in the background. It's nice. Lastly, for close-ups, we have this pigeon. So this is probably like the most common bird of all. Most people don't really think about pigeons when they see them because there's everywhere. So I wanted to get a more unique perspective. Um, and through this really close headshot, I was able to get almost like an alien-looking shot. It's not what you think about when you see a pigeon at all. I was able to really emphasize that texture and contrast.
That's good.
So my last category here is environment. And this is my favorite category because I think environment is how you really show stories, which is something I really like in photos. And something I want to emphasize is that not a lot of these photos were taken at like the 500 millimeter distance. A lot of them are taken closer up, and sometimes that might actually enhance the shot. So our first shot here is a perfect example of that. It pretty much breaks every rule that most beginners are taught. You know, you're always told to get eye level, get that cloudy, soft lighting, get as close up as you can. This kind of breaks all those rules. So it was taken like really high up on a cliff. It was also taken towards midday and it's very zoomed out. But in this case, I think those aspects actually enhance the photo because I was able to emphasize almost the contrast. Through the short focal distance, I was able to get that really long line through the rock. I was able to emphasize kind of the mist from the sea, from the waves hitting the rock, through the harsh light, and I was able to um, really emphasize, the scale of the scene. Next, we have this Heerman's goal. I think this is classically a good image, like not just bird photography wise, but in normal photography because it has those elements of foreground, middle ground, background. And I really like how it highlights the location I was in. So because you can clearly see the rocky cliffs in the background, the sea, and then the blurred foreground. So there's multiple points of interest, and I'm able to show the bird's entire habitat. Next, we have this bluebird, and I think this shot kind of perfectly represents a bluebird because you can basically see its entire environment, which I really like. We have, the bird itself, a scraggly branch that is perched on, but we also have some, dead grass in the front and an oak habitat in the back where it lives. So you're very connected to the environment and you're able to see kind of where the bird lives, not just the bird itself, through that contrast. Even though we have the blurred background, you can kind of see the environment in the background. And this was actually taken during a smoky day during wildfire season. And that kind of helped create the separation between the foreground and the background. Next, we have one of my favorite shots. These are wimbrels along the California coast. And this combines a lot of categories that I really like. So first of all, we got that golden light, beautiful golden light at sunset. But you can also see some really good movement in the photo because we have the bird moving, and then we also have the wave about to break in the background. So there's really great, like almost like potential energy. You can almost tell what's going to happen right after the shot ends, which I like. Um, yeah, so this one you can really see a story, and you can see everything about the shot. The environment, foreground, background, everything. Next, we have this spotted towhee. Again, this has multiple categories. So I was actually in kind of a valley that was surrounded by mountains. It was sunrise, so I knew that I wanted to get a bird in the mountains. And that was actually pretty hard. There weren't very many birds that day, but I was able to get this really small in frame towhee. And I really like the flow of energy through this picture because you have, the towhee singing kind of up the mountain, um, and it creates like a really great kind of a line that your eye follows. Um, and then there's also some really nice color contrast with the bird, plants, and the mountain. Lastly, this is a little bit of an unconventional one and also breaks a lot of rules. We have this snowy egret. So again, this one was taken pretty high up at a high angle, not really close to eye level at all. Um, and it's very small in frame. Um, so I think where this image shines is the texture. There's a lot of different textural contrasts in this photo. If you got, the smooth water, you got the textured rocks, and the foreground, the plants. And that kind of creates more points of interest than just a bird with a blurred background. And you're also able to kind of tell how the bird is moving through the frame. So it really grabs the eye. Yeah, so some final thoughts. I would suggest that people think about their shots because I think one of my favorite parts of photography is that you have complete creative freedom. You can make your shot however you want it. As long as you like it, that's all that matters. Um, Second, my perspective as a young birder and photographer. So I know a lot of young birders like me had a little trouble starting out because you don't really have access to good gear. Maybe you don't even have a DSLR, you just have maybe a Coolpix or something like that. But I want to show that it's still possible to get those good shots. Like a lot of my shots, especially those environmental shots, were taken with my 55 to 300, which is a kit lens. And you don't even need all that 300. I think a lot of shots are taken under 200. So what really matters is your artistic mindset and just your willingness to start. If you start taking photos, then you're gonna get better, no matter how bad your gear is. Um, and maybe I want to reword that because I wouldn't say there's any bad gear. The gear is just what you have. It's just up to you to take advantage of it in the best way that you can. Next, focusing on the story. So a lot of my shots are environmental, and that's because I think it's important to see the whole story. Close-up shots are great. They can also tell stories, but sometimes if you zoom out, you can get a really unique perspective. Lastly, breaking the rules. So I know I talked a lot about, getting good light, getting eye level, even getting good geometry, but I also think that rules are there for a reason, to provide a usually consistent shot that's probably technically good. And it's good to follow those rules, but sometimes it's more important to break them because that's when you get really unique shots. Um, I think that can be a lot more interesting than just, following the basic rules. So don't be afraid to experiment and get out of your comfort zone. Um, yeah, that's all I have. Thanks so much, and I really hope you enjoyed.